Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and for the last, considered video of the year, as there is a stream this evening, I thought I'd talk about Brexit trade deals, as it's being noted that the government have failed to deliver on their manifesto promises to strike free trade agreements with 80% of UK trade. But is this really a bad thing? I think for once, this Brexit failure may actually be a hopeful indicator that the government are going to be more realistic. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yeah, as I say, my last scripted video of the year, I had a number of thoughts about what to do. I didn't just want to do a rundown of some of the biggest stories of 2022 in case that comes up in tonight's stream when I'll see you all. What do you mean you're going out for New Year's Eve? Don't be ridiculous. So I thought to myself, well, it just seems fitting that it's Brexit, and what better on the subject of Brexit than to consider something the government said would be achieved by now. You know, 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, we had an election. In that manifesto, there was an aim that was going to be achieved within 3 years. So basically now. And it's to do with the trading position. So when it came to tangible Brexit benefits, like getting better, more focused trade deals was a big promise in 2016. And it wasn't really one of the stupid promises. See, with the EU, Brussels negotiates trade agreements on behalf of all member states. We all contribute trade negotiators, and they get one deal for everyone. And they need to come to arrangements that everyone will consider an improvement. Because if any members don't like the deal, they can veto it. And this has happened before, and it will happen again. I could argue that despite this extra barrier to negotiating trade deals, the sheer size of the EU single market means that deals are eventually struck with almost everyone. The US and China will always remain elusive because they won't really get on board with the EU's drive for regulations to drive standards up. There's a fundamental difference of viewpoint when it comes to the EU, to the United States and to China. But for everyone else, the deal is eventually struck because Europe is a very wealthy consumer market. But in theory, if you could negotiate the deals as an individual country, you can just focus on areas of trade that are important to yourself and your trade partner. You don't have to worry about areas of trade that interest Belgium or the Netherlands or Ireland. Much tidier, and you can, in theory, get a deal that suits you better. Fine. The problem is that the theory is not matched in practice, because there are a couple of elements that Brexiteers forgot to mention. The first is that as an individual country, we have a way smaller consumer market to dangle in front of the other side of the talks. Trade negotiations are essentially all about trying to persuade the other side to open up their market to your businesses, whilst trying to limit how much you open up your own market. You are more likely to get a deal in your own favour if you are negotiating on behalf of more consumer dollars than the other side. That way, a proportionally smaller opening of your own market is still very tasty for the other side. The UK on its own is a significant consumer market, yes, but nothing like on the same level as the whole EU single market. So our negotiating position may have been more focused on a smaller range of trade areas, but our negotiation power was massively diminished. Then there's the second factor, which seemed to be forgotten. It was that leaving the EU single market would suddenly leave us bereft of trade agreements with basically everyone if we weren't careful. We would need to build up trade deals, and quickly. But we couldn't possibly have the officials or the ministers to pay attention to lots of negotiations at the same time. You know, without just agreeing to whatever the other side wanted, it would take us decades to arrange the decades worth of trade deals we had with the EU, leaving us with very poor trading conditions with other countries for all that time. The only way to avoid this, which is what we did, was to first of all try and arrange a lot of photocopied deals that are just on exactly the same terms as the EU. And then when it comes to a few others, like marquee countries, agree whatever the other side wants. Because they know we're desperate. They know we're desperate for a deal. This is why these small number of trade negotiations that we have concluded, I think it's about 5 so far, have been very one-sided and not in our favour. In fact, when you read the manifesto aim, I can't really call it a promise, So you had to smell a rat in the first place. So it said, and I quote, I'll read the thing. It says, "Our goals for British trade are accordingly ambitious. We aim to have 80% of UK trade covered by free trade agreements within the next 3 years, starting with the USA, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. These will be negotiated in parallel with our EU deal." Almost every word is a warning sign to people who pay attention to politics. Not the use of term, you think about these two, our goals, ambitious, we aim. All of these tell you it's not going to happen. Like in an election campaign, you have to actually be quite positive about what you can deliver. It doesn't really do you any favours to be hesitant. No, you go, no, we're going to deliver this. This is something Boris Johnson had no problem with. He boastfully promised all sorts of things that were never achievable. So why the hesitant language with the trade deals? Because it was never going to happen. It wasn't even on the outermost limits of optimism. It's not going to happen. Like starting with the USA, the manifesto said by the time the Conservatives launched their 2019 manifesto, by then Joe Biden had already won the race for the White House. And he'd made it clear that he would not be negotiating trade deals with us or anybody else until he felt that the American economy was in a strong enough position to get the best deals. So anyone at all paying any attention to politics on the world stage would have known that this manifesto statement was unachievable. The US trade deal was sunk before they even sent the manifesto booklets to the printers. As for the line about negotiating them in parallel with the EU deal, well, that implied that all of these agreements, with some of the most important economies to us in the world, would be concluded within a year. Utterly ridiculous. And the Tories knew it, hence their cautious language. It's now been pointed out that it is 3 years since that election and the aims have not been met. But this may be no bad thing. We currently have two types of free trade agreement, those which were just copied and pasted from the equivalent EU deals, that is the vast majority of them, and then the ones that were genuinely new. And the best deals we have are those that were just copied EU deals. All of our actually new ones are on worse terms. The EU agreement has reduced our GDP growth by 5.5% with them, it's been calculated. Our Japanese deal has actually reduced our exports to Japan. There's no argument about the calculations used for that at all. Our useful trade with Japan has gone down since we signed the deal. Simple as that. The Australia-New Zealand deals, which do not come online for years, are going to crush British farming. And even the government's own figures say that it's worth maybe a 0.1% boost to GDP in about 15 years, if we're lucky. As for the Singapore deal, it's an important trading partner for us, but there doesn't seem to be anything in it that's not available to EU members. The only reason you wouldn't call this a copy over deal is because the deal only really came online for the EU and the UK very recently, so basically after Brexit. So again, we don't get anything that we wouldn't have had as EU members in it. There's nothing in it for us. So what we have is just over 70 trade agreements that are on exactly the same terms as EU member states have, and we would have had, and a handful of deals on worse terms. With a track record like that, it's actually a good thing that we don't meet that 80% target in my view. In fact, so disastrously wrong have our trade deals gone that a former cabinet minister who was instrumental in arranging our Australian-New Zealand deals trashed them as soon as he found himself on the backbenches when Rishi Sunak was made Prime Minister. And I gather Canada's interested in discussing an upgrade to our current carryover deal because we seem to be giving much smaller economies than them whatever they ask for. They fancy a bit of that. In fact, I think there's a few countries we're potentially in talks with, and you would think lots of countries around the world were maybe thinking to themselves, well, we've maybe got a maximum of 2 years here to get a really good deal for us before the new government comes in and is less keen on bending over just to get cheap headlines in the Daily Express. Our accession to the CPTPP is also stalled. Another benefit to those who care about the UK economy, that'll do us no good. As with any potential for a US deal, our talks with the CPTPP, the Pacific Trading Bloc, are not going to go much further while we threaten the Good Friday Agreement with loose talk about unilaterally buggering about with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it may also be that, external politics aside, the administration which has replaced Johnson's just doesn't see the need to arrange trade agreements that work against our interests. The only deal they seem keen on right now is membership of that Pacific Trading Bloc. So that'll be the one to watch, I think. The government keep claiming that, oh, it'll be brilliant. This is £9 trillion combined GDP free trade bloc, which is not quite right, is it? It's £8 trillion. I worked it out. But that's neither here nor there. GDP is not a measure of how much trade we have with countries or how much we can boost it to at all. It's a measure of their own productivity. Also, the EU GDP is £13.7 trillion. That's 70% higher. And that's a genuine free trade bloc. CPTPP members do not trade freely amongst one another. They just trade on more favourable terms compared to third countries. They're also much further away, meaning transportation costs and delays limit the opportunities of our business compared to getting similar terms with countries on our doorstep. But this is the main show in town as far as the government seems concerned. As a minister recently stated, and I did do a video on it at the time, they see it as a way to stop Labour negotiating a customs union with the EU. Now, this is of course something Labour have ruled out for the next Parliament so far, but which will inevitably become in their interest to do later on. But the Northern Ireland Protocol is a massive sticking point to this. Not that there aren't other issues as well. I mean, I don't really see what the CPTPP get out of having us join. With luck, the government won't actually have the bandwidth to do much more in terms of trade agreement damage before the next election. They seem to be so busy firefighting their own internal battles that coordinated international policies may be beyond their reach. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. Until next time, I'll see you later.